On the laptop screen, a single line of text lit up against a stark white background, account balance, $0, $100. I blinked. One beat. Two. It wasn't a display error. It wasn't a slow update. There was nothing left. Outside the window, Tacoma rain fell slow and steady heavy drops that sounded like the heartbeat of a man who's lived long enough to know that peace is often just the quiet before a collapse. Today should have been quiet, our 45th wedding anniversary. Linda died in 2019, but every year I still make a second cup of coffee, set it on the windowsill beside the faded wedding photo. I planned to spend the morning talking to her the way I always do, soft words, no audience. Then the notice arrived. A short line of text, enough to erase 45 years of work savings and whatever faith I had left in the decency of the world. I dialed EverWest Federal Savings. A young woman's voice answered, polite and clipped. "Good morning, this is Carrie from EverWest. How may I help you?" I kept my voice slow, calm, as if I were asking about an electricity bill. "I need to confirm a withdrawal from my retirement account this morning." There was the sound of typing. A pause. Then her tone shifted, professional but blunt. "Yes, Mr. Ridge? The transactions were executed last week under a legal authorization in the name of Ethan Ridge." Ethan Ridge, my son. The air in the room seemed to thin, as if whatever had been in my lungs had been carefully siphoned away, just like the funds. "Legal authorization?" I asked. "Yes, sir. There's a signed document on file and ID verification. The total amount was $540,000. I hung up. No shouting. No smashing of glass. Just the quiet stare into a screen going dim. I opened the EverWest app again and tapped transaction history. 8 entries. They came up cold and precise like accounting knife blows. $40,000. Northbridge Ventures, LLC, $25,000. Northbridge Ventures, LLC. 8 times. 8 cuts. I'd never heard of the company, but I recognized the name Northbridge. Years ago, I'd told Ethan in a moment of foolish dreaming that if I ever built anything big, I'd like to build a bridge from Tacoma to Anderson Island and call it Northbridge. He remembered that. And now he'd used that name to drain his father dry. I opened his Facebook. The top of his page showed a photo posted 4 hours earlier, Ethan, in a white blazer, a glass of champagne in his hand. Samantha, his wife, in a pink bikini, laughing under a Hawaiian sun. Beside them, Marjorie Rivers, Samantha's mother, cocktail in hand. The caption read, "Finally we made it. Family deserves luxury. Deserves luxury." Whose family? I looked at the picture for a long time. Not out of envy, out of the aching clarity of a fear I'd always had. I'd raised a man who thought other people's kindness was an unattended wallet. Wind tapped at the window. The rain kept time. Across the table, Linda's wedding photo caught the soft light from the screen. She was smiling the way she always had, gently. "You balance the books, Malcolm," she used to say. "You trust numbers, but some things in life aren't measured in dollars." I used to laugh at that. I understand it now. I pulled my EverWest card from my wallet and placed it on the table. Slowly, deliberately, I took a utility knife and sliced it cleanly in half, a cold, neat cut. One half slid to the floor. A small sound. But I knew somehow that was the first sound in a story Ethan never expected to find himself in. I opened the old wooden cabinet and took out Linda's ledger, the notebook she'd kept since 1981, where every household expense had been recorded in her steady, small hand. On the first page she'd written, "For every dollar we earn, let it be clean. For every dollar we earn, let it be clean." I turned the brittle pages tuition bills for Ethan Linda's hospital, costs the payments on this house. Everything, every cent had come from sweat, from nights balancing ledgers, from interstate audits. And now those same numbers had betrayed me. My phone buzzed. An alert from the bank, new login from Nevada confirmed. Nevada, the state where Ethan had registered his shell company. At the same time, a messenger ping arrived. Dad, don't worry. It's all under control. Beneath the message, a photo Ethan by a pool, a red drink in hand. Maui at sunset. That light in his eyes, it was the light of someone who thinks he's won. I stood and went out to the porch. The rain had eased. The Tacoma Pier showed up shrouded in mist. Freight ships slid by slowly, and predictable, heavy, deliberate, never losing their heading. They were like my life, heavy, slow, but steadfast. I saved Ethan's photo into a private folder on my phone and labeled it Stage 1. Odd name, perhaps. But in finance, I learned every good plan begins with balancing cash flow. This time, I was going to balance the debt in blood. I looked at my son's smiling face one more time and spoke softly, almost a whisper. You chose to steal your father's blood. Now I will teach you the cost of every dollar. The screen went dark. Only the pocket watch ticked steady cold and as precise as a lifetime of accounting. When justice gets unbalanced, you learn to rebalance the ledger yourself. Numbers have never betrayed me. They are honest, unfeeling, and absolute, just like the way I've lived for over 40 years. I started at the bottom in a cramped little office of a regional trucking company called Cascade Freight Lines. The room was barely bigger than my garage now. 3 wooden desks, a humming Pentium computer, and the steady rattle of a dot matrix printer that never slept. I worked late every night balancing ledgers down to the cent. Bit by bit, I climbed. People used to say my work required a precision so ruthless it bordered on obsession. Chief Financial Officer. Not the highest title in the building, but the only one the CEO had to consult before signing a check. I used to believe that was my life's greatest achievement, until I realized those numbers meant nothing once the only person who truly understood me was gone. Linda, my wife. We met in 1980 in a night accounting class at Tacoma Community College. She was the girl with the blonde hair, a Casio calculator in one hand, and a cup of coffee that was always too sweet. I fell for her belief that morality could exist even in finance. She once told me numbers don't lie, Malcolm. Only the people writing them do. 39 years later, when I stood beside her hospital bed, listening to the heart monitor fall silent, I made myself a promise that I'd live by that line for as long as I drew breath. After Linda passed, Ethan became my only reason to wake up. He was 30, then a finance graduate from Seattle, sharp, articulate, hungry for more than he had. He told me once, Dad, I want the Ridge name to stop working for people and start being the ones in control. I didn't disagree. When I looked at him, I still saw the boy who used to sit beside me at the kitchen table while I worked, asking with wide eyes, "Why do you mark some numbers in red, Dad?" Because if I don't, someone might use them the wrong way. I never imagined that someone would one day be him. When Ethan founded Ridge Financial Group, I was proud. My only son finally building something of his own. At first he'd ask for advice, then he got too busy. Our calls grew shorter, rarer, thinner, but whenever we did talk, he'd always end with the same line. "Don't worry, Dad. I'll handle the investments. Your money should be working, not sleeping." One evening he brought Samantha home, his wife, a beautiful woman, confident, polished, far too comfortable with the camera. She live-streamed everything, dinner, the wine bottle, even me clearing the plates. Linda would have hated it. She used to say, the more people show off, the emptier they are. That night, Samantha smiled, voice dripping with charm, "Dad, I think your funds deserve professional management. Ethan's got a plan. 15% annual returns, totally legit. I smiled back. As long as you don't spend profit buying things you can't buy back. She didn't understand. Or maybe she didn't care. Ethan just poured another glass of wine and said nothing. Then came that day, 8 months ago. He showed up with a thin folder, laid it in front of me, his tone light, casual. Dad, can you sign here? It's just an authorization for me to handle your retirement fund. It'll save you a lot on taxes. I looked at him, that familiar face so much like Linda's, and I signed. I didn't ask questions, because I trusted him, because I'd taught him that a signature is a promise, and I never imagined my own son would use that promise to erase me. When Linda was alive, she gave me a silver pocket watch. On the back, she'd had it engraved, "Integrity never expires." Every time life got hard, I'd open it and listen to the tick, steady calm like Linda's heartbeat once was. I wore it even in my sleep. As long as I could hear it, I knew I hadn't lost my way. But 8 months ago, after signing that paper, I set it on the shelf. For the first time in my life, I thought I was safe. And that's exactly when I became vulnerable. Weeks passed. Ethan stopped calling. When I texted, his replies were short. Everything's fine. Don't worry. I'd still send him articles about market shifts or little notes like, "Do you still remember how much you loved your mom's roast beef?" No reply. One gray November afternoon, I drove downtown to his office. Glass walls, gold lettering on the door. Ridge Financial, building wealth for generations. The receptionist smiled politely. "He's in a meeting." I waited 2 hours. When Ethan finally came out, he looked irritated. "Dad, next time. Call first. I'm the CEO here, not your little boy anymore." I nodded. Didn't argue. But that night back home, I opened the pocket watch again. The tick was still steady, but for the first time it felt like a countdown. December came. Christmas lights glowed across the city. Ethan sent me a bottle of Opus one of the finest wines I'd ever seen, with a note for the man who taught me the value of time. I placed it beside the pocket watch. The value of time. He'd learned the lesson, just not the way I meant it. That Christmas Eve, I poured myself a glass and listened to the clock tick. For reasons I couldn't explain, it sent a chill down my spine. Linda's voice came back to me, soft, like a memory through fog. Integrity never expires, but trust does. I didn't understand then. Now I do. I thought I knew every number, every contract, every line. But I'd forgotten one truth: when trust is given a price, it becomes the cheapest currency of all. I looked toward Linda's photo, the Christmas lights reflected in her eyes. And I whispered almost to myself, "Linda, I taught our son that integrity never expires. But maybe the next lesson is this: not everyone knows how to keep it." I closed her old ledger, locked the drawer, and fastened the pocket watch to my wrist again. The tick was steady, cold, precise, like the first beat of a debt being calculated. 3 days after Christmas, Tacoma was frozen solid, quiet enough that I could hear the wind whistling through the cracks in the doorframe, like a whisper reminding me that something was still unsettled. That morning, when I opened the mailbox, buried among bills and holiday flyers, was a thick envelope stamped with the seal of the Internal Revenue Service. I'd never feared a letter from the IRS before. I'd worked with them all my life. I knew every clause, every loophole, every stroke of a pen that could cost a man his home or win him a refund. But when I tore it open, my hand stopped cold. Notification of income discrepancy. Reported income exceeds filed returns by $278,000. I read it again and again. $278,000 income I'd never earned, and according to the IRS, I'd signed for it. It felt like someone had laid a slab of stone on my chest. What had been stolen wasn't just my money. It was my name. That afternoon, I walked next door. The gray-blue door swung open to reveal Irene Dawson, my neighbor, 68, retired IRS auditor, sharp eyes and a cup of mint tea already in her hand. "Malcolm, good Lord. You look terrible. What happened? I think someone's using my name to make money." She invited me in. Her house smelled of tea and order, the faint ticking of a wall clock filling the silence. I handed her the IRS notice and a few printed bank statements. She adjusted her glasses, scanning the pages the way old investigators do, half memory, half instinct. Her pen tapped the paper. "This isn't an error, Malcolm. Look here, 8 transfers repeating every 12 days between 25 and 40,000 each, all wired to the same company, Northbridge Ventures, LLC. She looked up, voice dropping lower. "I've seen this before, too many times. They're not just stealing from you. They're building a fake income record in your name. Your account is being used to launder something bigger." I sat there silent. Her words landed like a hammer. "And I said, slowly, gave them the pen to sign the crime." Irene's face softened, part pity, part respect. "You're not the first man betrayed by family, Malcolm, but you've got something the others didn't experience. You know numbers, and numbers don't disappear. We'll follow the trail." We spent hours at her kitchen table. I read each transaction aloud. She marked each one in red ink the way she must have done in the audit office years ago. The deeper we dug, the colder I felt. Every transfer carried my electronic signature, Emridge authorized, a legitimate credential, one I had never created. How had Ethan gotten it then? It hit me, the power of attorney. 8 months ago. He'd said, "Just sign here, Dad. I'll handle the rest." The rest. The rest was turning me into the perfect cover for his money laundering scheme. I left Irene's house when the sky had already gone dark. Rain fell like smoke, thin, quiet, reflecting the city lights in streaks of silver. Back home, I sat at my desk and pulled the old folder from the drawer, the one with a copy of that authorization form. The paper looked fine. The ink didn't. Under the desk lamp, the signature was backdated 1 year. The ink bled darker, uneven, trembling, not my hand. Not the hand of a man who'd balanced ledgers for 40 years. With a magnifying glass, I saw the faint watermark, "Copy, filed 2022. But the document I'd signed was from 2023. He'd copied it, changed the date, and legalized every withdrawal. I opened my laptop and searched for Northbridge Ventures. The website looked polished, clean fonts, stock photos, 2 tabs, about and contact. No employees listed, no physical address. Just a P.O. box in Las Vegas, Nevada. At the bottom of the page, 1 line of fine print registered by Ridge Financial Group. I stopped breathing. Ethan hadn't just used my name to drain my savings, he'd used his own company to build another one. A shell company. A ghost. I stepped out onto the porch. The night was still, water trickling through the gutters. In my pocket, the silver watch ticked on steady calm. Linda's voice echoed in memory when someone lies with a signature. "Malcolm, let the numbers tell the truth." I opened the watch. The second hand moved smooth, perfect. I could almost feel my blood keeping time with it, cold, slow, deliberate. Back at the desk, I opened a new notebook and wrote the title in black ink, Northbridge, Phase 1. Then, line by line, like an old accountant balancing the dead. Company name, Northbridge Ventures, LLC. Registration, Nevada. Legal owner, Ridge Financial Group. Financial guarantor. Malcolm Ridge, forged. And beneath it, I wrote one more line. An accountant doesn't need to kill a man. He just needs to make the numbers run backward. The next morning, Irene brought a folder bound in twine. I traced the EIN, the company number. It's real, but registered through a virtual office service. I've got a contact at the IRS who can verify it. But Malcolm, be careful. If they know you're digging, they could move everything. I nodded. Thank you, Irene. From now on, everything we say goes on paper. She smirked the smirk of someone who's seen too many confessions cross her desk. That's exactly what I used to say 20 years ago. You know, innocent people always think justice shows up on its own. It doesn't. You have to lead it to the door. That night I did something I'd never done in all my years as a CFO. I opened a bottle of whiskey, not to forget to remember. To remember the taste of betrayal, metallic, bitter, and hot. On my desk, two things sat side by side, Linda's yellowed wedding photo and the forged authorization form. She looked at me from the photo, gentle as ever. Linda, I whispered. Taught our son how to make money. Now I'll teach him one last lesson. When you take what's not yours, you pay it back with your soul. Outside, the rain stopped. The streetlights spilled through the window, dividing my reflection on the floor, half light, half dark. Just like me, half father, half man who's learning revenge by calculation. The pocket watch ticked again, slow, heavy, exact. I wrote one final line in my notebook, tomorrow begin collecting evidence. And in that moment I knew my trust had died, but my reason had just awakened. I never thought I'd live long enough to sit across from a criminal prosecutor. But that morning, Irene knocked on my door, a thick folder in one hand, her tone clipped and matter-of-fact. I know someone who can help. Used to work for the Washington State Attorney's Office. He owes me a favor. His name was Frank Delaney, 74 years old, former state prosecutor. Silver hair, gravel voice, and the kind of eyes that had seen too much sin to be surprised by any of it. We met at a small cafe on South Pine, the kind of place where no one looks twice at three old people talking about white-collar crime over burnt coffee. Frank opened the folder, scanned the statements, and nodded slowly. Then he said something that froze me to my chair. Malcolm, this isn't theft anymore. It's elder financial abuse. And in the state of Washington, that's a felony. The words hit harder than I expected. Elder financial abuse. 3 words that felt both humiliating and bitterly ironic. All my life I'd balanced other people's books, caught the fraud before it ruined them. Now I was the victim of the very game I once mastered. Frank slid his coffee, closer voice, even deliberate. We'll handle this quietly. No confrontations, no noise. The quieter you stay, the tighter the trap closes. Irene placed her pen on the table, crisp and organized as always. Step 1. We need direct proof. Record every call with the bank, anyone who mentions the authorization. Malcolm, you have a smartphone, right? I do. And I know how to use it. Frank smirked. Good. Step 2, request notarized statements. Bank seals, issue dates, wet signatures. Once we have 3 originals, I'll send certified scans to the Financial Crimes Unit. Irene nodded. I'll draft a formal request IRS style. No one will question it if it looks procedural. Just say it's for a personal audit. Frank leaned back, studying me. Last thing, you still have that email chain about the authorization, don't you? Yes. Ethan sent one last year saying he needed temporary access to manage investments. I thought it was harmless. It's not harmless. It's evidence. Keep the entire thread, metadata attachments, timestamps. Don't delete a thing. I'll extract it properly. I looked at them, two retirees who never should have been my allies in a war like this. Irene, who probably knew the 26 U.S. code better than most active IRS agents. Frank, who'd once sent corporate embezzlers to prison. And me, an old accountant whose son forged his name to destroy him. I took a slow breath. I'll follow your lead. But I'm not pressing charges. Not yet. Frank raised an eyebrow. You're planning to forgive him, no? I said, my voice thin but steady. I'm planning to let the numbers close the trap he built. That afternoon, the three of us began. Irene set her laptop on my kitchen table, recorder running. I dialed EverWest Federal Savings. Good afternoon, this is Carol from EverWest. How can I help you, Mr. Ridge? I need to verify the authorization form for my retirement account. A few seconds of typing. Yes, sir, we have a valid document signed February 12th, 2022. Was the signer physically present at the branch that day? According to our records, it was submitted through an authenticated email scan. Thank you. That's all I needed. Irene gestured for me to end the call, then smiled a small, sharp smile of quiet satisfaction. Perfect. That confirms the form wasn't signed in person. Violation of Section 4.2 of the State Financial Authorization Act. Frank underlined the words authenticated email scan in his notes. And they've just admitted it on record. That's our first nail. 3 days later, I walked into the EverWest branch downtown and requested certified statements. The young teller hesitated. I'll need to check with our legal department, sir. I smiled faintly and slid Frank's business card across the counter. Frank Delaney, former Washington State Attorney. Her face blanched. She disappeared into the back. 15 minutes later, she returned with 3 stamped statements, each signed by the branch manager. Irene handled them like FBI evidence, slipping each into a moisture-proof sleeve. In the days that followed, my quiet little house became a war room. Frank hunched over state codebooks, marking statutes in red ink. Irene reviewed transaction logs with surgical precision. And I wrote everything, every call, every amount, every name into my ledger. Then came the discovery that chilled me deeper than any December wind. Ethan hadn't just drained my funds. He'd filed fake investment income under my Social Security number, making it look like I'd underreported income, triggering the IRS audit. A perfect move. If I hadn't caught it, they would have used the tax penalty as cover for the stolen money. Frank read the paperwork, jaw tight. Smart, but stupid enough to leave fingerprints. Ink always tells a story. Irene smirked, eyes still scanning the page. They don't realize what it means to deal with a man who's balanced books for 40 years. Malcolm, you remember every entry, don't you? Every cent. And every typo on those transfer slips. That night, I sat alone in my living room. The yellow light cast long shadows across the wall, now covered with papers and red strings, names, accounts, dates, all converging on one point. Ethan Ridge. From a distance, it looked almost beautiful, a spiderweb spun from betrayal. I opened my pocket watch. The ticking blended with the rain outside. And in that quiet rhythm, I realized something. I wasn't just planning revenge anymore. I was building a structure of justice, precise, cold, and irrefutable. A week later, Frank arrived in his brown coat, a sealed envelope under his arm. He set it on the table, speaking low. It's done. The preliminary report's been filed with the Washington State Financial Crimes Unit case number WFCU-R. From now on, every transaction tied to your name is under state watch. I nodded. No triumph, No adrenaline. Just a calm mechanical relief, the feeling of gears finally starting to move. Frank looked at me, eyes weary but sharp. Mr. Ridge, you don't have to raise your voice to get justice. You just have to make sure the numbers speak at the right time. I turned to the window. The rain was still falling, steady cold, ticking against the glass like the second hand of my watch. And in my voiceover, low and deliberate, I said, sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs the numbers in the right place at the right time. Across the Pacific, while I was pinning evidence to the wall in my dim Tacoma living room, they were living like the word conscience had never been invented. The first photos from Maui appeared the very next morning. I didn't look them up. Irene sent one, her voice dripping with irony. You should see this, Malcolm. Your modern family seems to be enjoying your retirement plan just fine. On my screen, Samantha, in a white dress, champagne glass, raised head tilted against Ethan's shoulder. Next to them, her mother, Marjorie Rivers, lifted her own glass with a caption, "Beneath family deserves luxury." Samantha had added a comment, "Manifesting abundance, #, grateful, #new beginnings." Abundance. I stared at the word for a long time. They were celebrating abundance built from someone else's exhaustion. From my 40 years of ledgers, calloused fingers, and sleepless audits. That night, the wind off the Pacific swept through the balconies of Kapalua Bay villas, where the waves below looked like black silk torn by the moonlight. Inside the luxury suite, laughter spilled from the living room. Samantha's voice was bright, careless. "Told you, Mom, he never checks the account. That retirement fund's been sleeping for 10 years. Marjorie's reply came sharp, cold as a paper cut. "Old people don't need money, sweetheart. It's time the young enjoyed it." They both laughed. Ethan forced a smile, but their laughter rattled in his head like glass breaking. He stepped onto the balcony, looking down at the dark water, trying to steady his breath. He told himself he wasn't a criminal, just borrowing. Temporarily. But that word temporary was already starting to crack. Samantha joined him, her phone glowing in the dark. The blue light drew hard edges around her smile. "You know, Ethan, this is the life people are supposed to have. No ink, no paper, no boring spreadsheets." "Yeah," he said quietly. "But it was my dad's money." She rolled her eyes. "Your dad lives alone, eats toast, and counts coupons. You want him to die in that cold house, still hoarding every dime. At least now he's happy in some indirect way." He didn't answer. The ocean crashed below, cold, relentless, judgmental. Part of him knew she was wrong. But the other part, the arrogant, hungry part, built from years of wanting more, clung to her logic like a lifeline. Later that night, while Samantha was showering, her phone lit up on the dresser. One message. He wasn't looking for it. But it found him. "He's easy to control. Once the money's in my hands, we disappear." From Samantha to Marjorie. Ethan froze. Another text came in seconds later. "He won't live long anyway. Once it's done, we move everything to Nevada. Don't worry." The room suddenly shrank around him. His pulse thudded in his ears. He turned the phone face down, but the glow still burned through his thoughts. He sat on the edge of the bed, shaking, unsure whether he was more terrified of being betrayed or of realizing he'd done the same. Meanwhile, back in Tacoma, I sat alone in the dark. The only light came from my old laptop. A single ping broke the silence, a new email. "Suspicious login detected. EverWest Federal Savings. Location Las Vegas, Nevada. Unknown IP." I smiled faintly. The line between all the dots became perfectly clear. Ethan. Northbridge Ventures, Nevada. the state where he'd registered his shell company. I opened the IP tracker. Summerlin, South Las Vegas, a corporate ghost district filled with virtual offices, shell entities, and digital laundromats for money that didn't want to be seen. And now my retirement account had just been accessed from there. I pulled up the folder labeled WFCU 1284R, the official file Frank had sent. Everything was aligning. Only one mistake left, one careless click before suspicious became criminal. I called Irene. She answered on the third ring, sounding unsurprised. "You just got a Nevada login alert, didn't you? How did you know Frank predicted it? Every launderer tries to move data through Nevada. Habit. And habits, Malcolm habits, leave trails. So I let them exactly. Let the system record everything. Once they access your account across state lines using a forged authorization, it becomes interstate financial fraud. Federal jurisdiction. The big guns will step in." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the blinking cursor on the alert message. At the bottom, a small line read, "If this wasn't you, click here to report." I didn't click, didn't need to. The servers were already logging everything. I didn't want to stop them, I wanted them to walk one step deeper into the snare. I opened my notebook and wrote with the precision of habit IP 172.16888.42, Nevada time 11:42 p.m. PST. Device MacBook Pro. Ridge Financial Admin. Each line was another thread in the web I was spinning, fine, silent, and unbreakable. Every click, every email, every second would be evidence, exact, legal, merciless. Cut back to Maui. Samantha stepped out of the shower, hair damp towel around her shoulders. Ethan was still sitting on the bed, phone in hand, staring into space. "What's wrong with you?" she asked. "Nothing. You look haunted." "Relax, we've got the yacht tour tomorrow." She smiled, kissed his cheek, and turned away, never noticing that he already knew. He watched her go, chest tightening with a fear he couldn't name. Fear of her. Fear of himself. And most of all, fear of the man whose name still carried more weight than any fortune, Malcolm Ridge. In Tacoma, I stared at the glowing IP on my screen. I saved the logs, took screenshots, and sent them to Frank. 3 minutes later, his reply appeared, perfect. "You just caught them red-handed." I set the phone down, opened my pocket watch. The ticking filled the room, steady, cold, inevitable. Rain tapped on the roof, and in my voiceover, low and deliberate, I said, "Every crime leaves a trace. They just never expect that the trail itself will lead to my first strike." Monday morning. Tacoma was damp and bone cold, the kind of cold that seeps through your jacket and into your bones. Dew still clung to the windshield when Irene and I pulled up in front of EverWest Federal Savings. Inside, the air smelled like cold metal and printer ink, sterile, sharp, emotionless. It reminded me of my old accounting office, spotless floors, fluorescent lights, no room for mistakes or feelings. But that morning I wasn't there to balance someone else's books. I was there to reopen the ledger of my own betrayal. They led us to a private office. Behind the desk sat Carol, the young clerk who had answered my call days earlier. Her polite smile didn't reach her eyes. Irene laid a legal document on the table, Form 4506C, neatly signed by Frank Delaney, our legal representative. "We're requesting the 6-month access log for Mr. Ridge's retirement account," she said, her tone as cold as a scalpel. Carol hesitated. "That information is confidential, ma'am." Before she could finish, Frank appeared behind us, his timing almost theatrical. He set down his old state attorney ID on the desk and said quietly, just loud enough for the whole room to freeze, under Section 7(3) of Washington's Elder Protection Act, Mr. Ridge has full rights to review his account access history in suspected cases of financial abuse. If you refuse, I'll request a court order." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Carol swallowed, nodded, and began typing. Moments later, the monitor turned toward us. A list of log entries appeared. 10:01, Tacoma, Maui. 10:05, Ridge Financial Group, Internal IP 1044, Walk92. 10:16, Ridge Financial Group, Internal IP 1044, 1904. 12:27, Summerlin, Nevada. Each marked authorized by Ridge Access. My heart beat slow and steady, the same rhythm as the pocket watch ticking inside my coat. Irene pointed to the second line. "There. Direct access from your son's office. Fixed IP impossible to deny." I didn't speak. Didn't shout. Didn't curse. The part of me that wanted to scream was buried under 40 years of training, the discipline of a man who knew the only thing that mattered was documentation. When we left the bank, Frank opened the trunk of his car and handed me a freshly printed file. "I've drafted a temporary civil complaint, forgery, financial fraud, and abuse of power of attorney." He showed me the front page. Defendants: Ethan Ridge, Samantha Rivers Ridge, Ridge Financial Group, LLC. I stared at the names. They looked heavier than any verdict. "I don't want him in prison," I said quietly. Frank's eyes didn't waver. "Prison's not the goal. Justice is. And Justice Malcolm sometimes needs to be cold-blooded." Back inside the bank, Carol led us down to the lower level, a cold, silent vault lined with safety deposit boxes. The air smelled of steel and stillness. She stopped at box number 1132, entered the code, and slid it out. "Mr. Ridge, this is your late wife's box. It hasn't been opened in almost 10 years. I held the small metal case. My hands shook. The key, the same one that had shared space with Linda's silver watch, fit perfectly. The lock clicked open with a sound so small it felt like a heartbeat breaking. Inside lay a few yellowed papers, a faded wedding photo, and one small leather ledger, my original signature record, dated 1994. I opened it, my eyes tracing the old ink, curved loops, uneven strokes, the weight of a human hand. The forged authorization's signature was smooth, too clean printed. This one was alive, imperfect, real. Irene leaned in, whispering as if in church. "This is gold. The original wet ink signature book, forensic examiners can prove it instantly. No scan, no reproduction can mimic this texture." I gripped the ledger as if holding Linda's hand one last time. "Linda," I murmured, "I promise to protect what you built. And I will." By afternoon, we were back at Frank's house, a modest brick place that now looked like a law office. He ran the printer pages, spilling out in mechanical rhythm, each folder labeled and sealed. Evidence A, EverWest Access Log. Evidence B, Certified Bank Statements. Evidence C, Authentic versus Forged Signatures. Evidence D, Original authorization emails, finally. Frank attached the official request to Adult Protective Services, APS, the division handling elder financial abuse. At the top corner, bold black print read, "Case opened. APS reference WWFCU 1284R." I stared at the number. It looked sterile, clean. A case file, not a heartbreak. There was no emotion in it, no anger, no tears, just truth. And truth, I realized, was something Ethan had never respected. By the time we left Frank's office, the streetlights were glowing over the wet pavement. Engines hummed, tires hissed. And beneath it all, from my coat pocket, the steady tick of the watch. Everything I once believed in ethics family signatures had been bent, but something inside me had straightened again. Justice doesn't live in courtrooms. It begins the moment you stop running from the wound. At home, I laid the signature book and the pocket watch side by side on the table. Two relics. Two witnesses that never lied. I wrote in my journal line by line as I had done all my life, January 10th, 2024. The evidence is complete. The cost has begun. I don't want to destroy my son. But once justice starts moving, it doesn't stop. A draft blew through the window, turning the page. The lamplight hit the watch face, making the engraved words glimmer, "Integrity never expires." I smiled faintly, a tired smile, the kind you give a ghost. "Linda," I whispered, "I once thought morality lived in the ledger where everything could be added, subtracted, balanced. But now I know it lives in blood." The pocket watch ticked slow, steady, relentless, and every beat was another footstep of justice drawing closer. Across the Pacific, the sun rose over Maui like nothing had changed. But for Ethan Ridge, dawn carried the sound of something breaking. He woke in his suite at Kapalua Bay Villas, the ocean whispering beyond the balcony. The smell of fresh coffee lingered in the air. Samantha's voice filled the room, high, bright, perfectly curated for her phone camera. "Good morning, Maui. The universe rewards those who believe in abundance." Her followers sent heart emojis. She smiled wider. Ethan forced a grin and unlocked his phone. The screen blinked, then went black. A red banner appeared, "Account access restricted. Contact IRS, Federal Freeze Notice." He frowned, tried again. Credit card declined. Bank app locked for investigation. A knock at the door. A hotel staff member stood there holding an invoice. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ridge. Your card was declined. We'll need an alternate payment method." Samantha turned, her influencer smile vanishing. "What? It's fine," Ethan muttered. "Probably a system error." "A system error," she snapped. "You idiot, your father's suing you, isn't he?" Her voice ricocheted off the marble walls of the luxury suite, shattering the illusion of paradise they'd wrapped themselves in. From the bedroom, Marjorie Rivers emerged, silk robe, phone in hand. "I just got an email from Vegas. Northbridge's accounts are frozen. IRS and the Financial Crimes Unit are investigating." Samantha's eyes widened. "What do you mean frozen, Ethan? You said everything was legal." "It was. I didn't what? Steal from that old fool?" Ethan slammed his fist on the table, voice breaking. "Don't call him that." Silence. Marjorie glanced at her daughter, then said flat and sharp as glass, "Looks like the real fool was you." In Tacoma, I sat in my living room, mid-morning light spreading across my desk. My phone buzzed, an unfamiliar number from Hawaii. I answered. "Dad." Ethan's voice trembled. "What did you do to my accounts, the IRS?" "They froze everything. They said there's a federal order." I could hear the surf behind him, chaos rising in the distance. "It wasn't me, Ethan," I said slowly. "You signed your own sentence." There was no response, only ragged breathing. Then the sound of something crashing and Samantha's voice yelling in the background, "Give me the phone, you ruined everything." I ended the call. No need to listen further. The fall had begun. Back in Maui, the wind shifted. Samantha paced the room, tears streaking her mascara. "You said I could trust you. You said everything was fine." "You still can," Ethan murmured, exhausted. "We'll explain to who the feds. They've got logs, signatures, proof." "You've got what, an apology?" She hurled her phone onto the bed and turned to her mother. "We're leaving. Now. I'm not going down for this." Marjorie adjusted her purse voice, icy calm. You're right. We go before the walls collapse. Let him clean up his own mess. Wait. What do you mean, we? Ethan asked, panic rising. She met his eyes, her tone like a knife sliding into flesh. Family only exists when there's money, dear. She turned. Samantha hesitated for a heartbeat, then followed. The door closed. Ethan stood alone. Night fell quickly over Maui. He sat on the balcony, a half-finished glass of wine trembling in his hand. The air smelled of salt and smoke from the beach restaurants below. He unlocked his phone again, scrolled through photos, Samantha laughing, Marjorie raising her glass, captions glowing with hypocrisy. Love and abundance. We create our destiny. Every word felt like a slap. He dialed Samantha's number with service, opened the closet empty, his passport, wallet, laptop gone. The luxury suite that once sparkled under Maui sunlight was now a mausoleum of lies. The sound of waves outside no longer soothed him. It sounded like dirt falling onto a coffin. Meanwhile, in Tacoma, my office glowed with the soft yellow of a desk lamp. Papers covered the wall in perfect order, justice written in numbers. Frank called. His voice was calm, precise. IRS confirmed the federal freeze. They're coordinating with APS. From now on, every asset under Ridge Financial is frozen. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and silent, like receipts finally being paid. In Maui, Ethan turned on the TV. The local news anchor spoke in a calm, professional voice. The Washington State Financial Crimes Unit confirms an investigation into suspected elder financial abuse linked to Ridge Financial Group. CEO Ethan Ridge has been placed under temporary federal watch. The room spun. The wine glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the floor. He stumbled onto the balcony, shouting into the night, "Samantha, Mom, come back." Only the ocean answered. The suite fell quiet, a luxury tomb for the living. Back in Tacoma, my phone buzzed once more. A message from Frank. They froze him. First move successful. I opened my pocket watch. The silver glinted in the lamplight, the second hand ticking, calm, ruthless, inevitable. In my voiceover, low and cold, I said, "Karma doesn't strike like thunder." It arrives quietly in an email in a single red line that reads, "Account frozen." And sometimes, the betrayer's first lesson is to drown in the same silence he gave to others. Outside, the snow kept falling. And somewhere in Maui, surrounded by luxury and ruin, Ethan Ridge sat alone with nothing left but broken glass, lost money, and the sound of paradise collapsing. 3 months later. Rain fell lightly over Tacoma, whispering against the concrete steps of the Pierce County Courthouse. Each drop struck like a pin against glass, small, cold, deliberate. I stood under the courthouse awning, tightening my tie. The silver pocket watch rested inside my sleeve, its ticking louder than my heartbeat, louder than memory itself. Inside, fluorescent lights cast a pale glow over the marble hall. Ethan Ridge stood near the defense table, head bowed, clutching a folder. His once proud posture had shrunk. Beside him, Samantha was silent, no phone, no hashtags, no filtered smile. Just the hollow quiet of someone who'd run out of words to sell. I walked past them without looking. Frank Delaney in his worn brown coat fell into step beside me, a folder marked in bold black ink, State of Washington vs. Ethan Ridge et al. We entered the courtroom. At the bench sat Judge Harold Hopkins, early 60s, silver hair, eyes lined by both fatigue and fairness. He lifted the gavel. "Court is now in session." The sound echoed through the room, thick as drying concrete. Ethan stood at the defendant's table, his attorney young, nervous, adjusted his tie and began. Your Honor, my client acted under lawful power of attorney. Mr. Malcolm Ridge authorized the investment in Northbridge Ventures LLC, notarized and properly filed. Frank rose slowly. His voice carried the precision of a man sharpening a blade. We don't dispute the existence of that document, Your Honor. We dispute its authenticity. We will demonstrate that the signature is forged and that the notary public listed in that record does not exist. Judge Hopkins leaned forward. Do you have evidence, Mr. Delaney? Yes, Your Honor. Frank plugged a USB drive into the courtroom laptop. The large screen behind the judge flickered on. A security camera feed appeared EverWest Federal Savings, the same date listed on the authorization form. The footage showed Ethan entering the bank with a middle-aged man in a gray suit wearing a badge that read Notary Public. Ethan placed papers on the desk, signed, and left. No Malcolm Ridge in sight. Frank froze. The video zoomed in on the man's face. Your Honor, this man is Derek Lane. His notary license was revoked in 2019 for document fraud. A ripple of whispers filled the courtroom. Ethan's shoulders tensed. His lawyer began to stammer. Objection, the video source hasn't been authenticated, Judge Hopkins interrupted. Overruled. The footage was obtained directly from EverWest under order of the Washington Financial Crimes Unit. Proceed, Mr. Delaney. Frank nodded, cueing the next clip. This time the screen showed Ethan leaving the bank, handing a white envelope to the so-called notary, who pocketed it and walked away. The defense lawyer tried again, weaker this time. My client wasn't aware of that exchange. Frank's tone sliced through the air. On the contrary, he orchestrated it. And here's proof. He placed 2 folders on the evidence table, the original signature ledger from 1994 and the forged authorization form. A handwriting analyst took the stand. The ink pressure, stroke rhythm, and letter structure are inconsistent. The alleged signature is printed from a scan, not hand-signed. This forgery is indisputable. Judge Hopkins turned to Ethan. Mr. Ridge, would you like to respond? Ethan swallowed hard. His voice cracked. I was just trying to invest for him. I didn't mean, Frank cut in, voice cold and deliberate. Didn't mean you stole his money, forged his name, and used his identity to launder funds. Intent doesn't vanish just because the thief hesitated. Silence. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Samantha's eyes filled with tears. She didn't move toward him. Marjorie wasn't there, health issues, the report had said. Everyone knew she'd fled to Nevada. Ethan stood alone, pale, trembling, small. Judge Hopkins spoke again, his voice measured but unyielding. Mr. Ridge, do you plead guilty? Ethan shook his head, then lowered it into his hands. The judge looked down at his papers, then up again, the voice of the state final and absolute. The Pierce County Court of Washington finds the defendant Ethan Ridge guilty of elder financial abuse, forgery, and interstate money laundering. The court orders full forfeiture of assets belonging to Northbridge Ventures LLC, restitution of $540,000 to Mr. Malcolm Ridge, and 250 hours of mandatory community service within 2 years. Court adjourned. 3 strikes of the gavel. Each one landing with the sound of cracking stone, the bridge collapsing beneath a man who built his life on lies. I didn't look at my son as I walked out. No tears, no anger, no forgiveness. Only truth, the kind that doesn't need to shout. The man who once taught him how to add, subtract, and balance with honesty had just made him pay for every dishonest calculation. Frank walked beside me, holding the folder against his chest. Mr. Ridge, he said softly, justice stood with you today. I stopped in the hallway. Sunlight broke through the high glass windows, reflecting on the polished floor. I spoke slowly, as if closing a ledger one last time. Justice doesn't collapse, Frank. It just takes time for the concrete to dry. Outside, the rain had stopped. On the courthouse steps, the late afternoon light hit the silver of my pocket watch. Its hands kept turning steady, impartial, unhurried. I listened to the ticking blending with my own heartbeat, the rhythm of justice, the rhythm of consequence, the rhythm of a father who no longer believed in promises, only in the precision of truth. I thought I had grown used to exhaustion. But the morning after the verdict, as I stepped out of the Pierce County courthouse, my legs felt anchored to the cold concrete. No rain that day, only wind sharp enough to pierce the layers of my coat and settle straight into my chest. Frank said something about filing the final paperwork. His words faded like voices behind a closed door. All I could hear was the ticking of the pocket watch in my coat. Steady, patient. Yet something inside me no longer matched its rhythm. I don't remember when I fell. Only the shouting, the rush of footsteps, and the distant wail of an ambulance. When I opened my eyes, a white ceiling filled my vision. The scent of disinfectant burned my throat. A nurse adjusted my blood pressure cuff, her voice calm and careful. "Mr. Ridge, you had a mild cardiac episode. Stress-induced. You'll need rest." I nodded faintly. Fair enough, I thought. Justice, after all, was never free. That afternoon, Irene came by with a small thermos of mint tea. Her face was lined with both relief and worry. "You won, Malcolm," she said. "The case is closed. The money's coming back. Why do you look like you lost something?" I stared out the hospital window, where bare oak branches trembled in the wind. "Because justice charges interest, Irene. Every wrong I corrected took a heartbeat from me." She smiled sadly. "Maybe. But if you hadn't done it, who would? Sometimes the last person keeping the ledger has to pay so the next pages stay clean." I looked at her, my voice low. Linda would have said the same thing. Later that evening, Frank arrived, coat still wet from the rain. He set a thick envelope on the table beside my bed. "First confirmation from the court," he said. $120,000 has been wired back to your EverWest account. The rest will follow as restitution is processed." I nodded. No joy, no triumph. Money was never the point. I thought of Linda's old words, money can buy back everything except trust once it's lost. Frank seemed to read my silence. "I've seen people win cases, Malcolm. They celebrate, they drink, and then they crumble. But you fought for a reason. That reason makes this victory worth something." I smiled faintly. Worth something, yes. But it came with a bill. He chuckled softly, lowering himself into the chair. "You'll live long enough to see justice hold. Most people give up before it sets." Night fell quietly. The hospital was still. Machines beeped steadily beside me, a mechanical echo of life. That rhythm reminded me of my pocket watch still in police custody as evidence. They'd promised to return it once the case officially closed. I closed my eyes and thought justice can look like a red stamp, a ruling, a number 540,000. But to me, justice was the sound of ticking. Proof that Linda's spirit hadn't left, just kept time somewhere nearby. Morning came. A knock at the door, Officer Harris, the evidence clerk. He entered with a small, sealed bag and a gentle smile. "Mr. Malcolm Ridge. The case audit is finalized. This is cleared for return." He handed me the bag. Inside, my silver pocket watch, gleaming spotless, polished as if new. They had cleaned away everything except the memory. I opened it. The tick returned deep and steady as if it had been waiting. A tear slipped down my cheek, landing on the metal face and spreading into a faint circle. "Welcome home," I whispered. That afternoon, Irene and Frank returned together. They sat beside my bed, talking softly about closing procedures. Frank flipped through his folder. "APS has officially completed the case. Ethan begins 250 hours of community service. He's barred from holding any financial executive position for 10 years. Irene added her tone, both gentle and cutting. "Sometimes punishment isn't about prison. It's about living every day with your own name stained." I nodded. I never wanted him to lose everything. I only wanted him to understand money has no soul. But morality does. And once you sell it, there's no buyer in the world who'll give it back. After they left, I sat up and opened my small notebook, the same one that had tracked every figure in this long battle. I wrote one last line, March 22nd, 2024. "Justice delivered. Cost one piece of heart." I closed the book, placed the pocket watch on my chest, and let my eyes fall shut. The ticking filled the room, slow, even like a lullaby made of truth. And in that voice that has carried me through every storm, I thought I used to believe morality lived inside ledgers in the balance of numbers where everything could be measured. Now I know. It lives in blood, in the final honest beat of a heart that refuses to lie. That night, beneath the soft hum of hospital lights, I slept for the first time in years. Not because I'd won, but because every number had finally found its rightful place. 3 months after the trial. Spring rolled gently over Tacoma, laying a thin mist across the city. The oaks along the road to Tacoma Senior Haven began to bud again, quiet proof that life somehow insists on beginning anew. A young man walked slowly up the path, shoulders hunched beneath a faded gray jacket. Ethan Ridge. Once a CEO who spoke of profits and capital optimization, now he wore a plastic badge pinned to his chest. Volunteer. Community service program. 250 hours. No meetings, no golf courses, no investor brunches. Only floors to mop, tables to clean, and the eyes of elderly people who had once trusted men like him. Inside, Irene Dawson, now the accounting advisor for the center, stood behind the reception desk, sorting through papers. She looked up as Ethan entered. No anger, no pity, just calm assessment. "You're on time." "Good. The West Wing needs cleaning today. Then help move the books into the common room." Ethan nodded. Understood. His voice was rough, like someone who'd spent months learning not to speak. Irene glanced at him, the corner of her mouth lifting ever so slightly. Not exactly the kind of contract you're used to signing. "Is it?" He said nothing, just bent down, lifted the mop bucket, and began. By noon, sunlight poured through the wide windows, reflecting off the polished floor. Ethan sat to catch his breath, surrounded by the hum of conversation and the smell of cafeteria soup. An older man shuffled over with a cane and eased into the chair beside him. His hair was white, his eyes sharp with memory. "You new here, son?" "Yes, sir. Community service. For something you did wrong." Ethan managed a small, bitter smile. "Something like that." The man was quiet for a moment, then said slowly, every word carrying weight. "I had 2 sons once. One mortgaged my house. The other forged my name for my pension. Both thought they were clever. You know what I learned?" Ethan looked up, silent. "When you hold money that isn't yours," the man said, his trembling hand resting over Ethan's, "your hands never feel warm again." The words landed softly, but cut deep. Ethan stared at his palms. The room was warm, but his fingers were ice. That afternoon, he worked in the small library near the back of the center. Along the wall hung framed photos of donors and advocates, people who had fought for the protection of the elderly. Ethan wiped the glass frames one by one until he reached the largest photo in the center. He froze. The face in the picture was calm, familiar, mercilessly clear. The eyes, the same eyes that once watched him learn arithmetic at the kitchen table, met his through the glass. Below, engraved in brass, Malcolm Ridge, advocate for elder justice. The mop slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. The sound echoed through the quiet room. He stepped closer, fingertips brushing the cold glass. His father's face looked back, not with anger, not even disappointment, just truth. Malcolm Ridge hadn't disappeared into court files or financial ledgers. He lived here in this building, and every life being protected because of him. Irene entered, saw him standing there motionless. Her voice was soft but firm. You know, Malcolm donated part of his restitution to start this foundation. He wanted no one else to go through what he did. Ethan turned to her, eyes wet. Does he know I'm here? He does, she said quietly. He didn't stop you from coming. He wanted you to see. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. He spent the rest of the afternoon working in silence. Old residents played cards, told stories, laughed softly. Sometimes they asked him to bring them water or move a chair. One woman smiled kindly. You're doing a fine job, dear. What's your name, Ethan? Ethan Ridge. Ridge, you say? Oh, I know that name. A Mr. Ridge helped me last year, sorted out my bank fraud case. Ethan's throat tightened. I know him, he whispered. Well, she said warmly, thank him for me. We need more good men like that. Good men. The words hit him like a blade. He wasn't one. Not yet. But for the first time he understood what it might mean to try. That evening the center dimmed its lights early. Ethan stayed behind in the library. The building was quiet, the kind of silence that made one listen to their own heartbeat. He looked again at his father's photo illuminated by a single desk lamp. Then he pulled a folded form from his pocket, a request for reassignment. Transfer from custodial duties to internal finance assistance. At the bottom, he added a note in his own hand. I want to learn bookkeeping again from the beginning. He placed the form on the desk and looked back up at the photo. In his father's eyes, he thought he saw a faint shimmer of silver, the reflection of a pocket watch still ticking somewhere. And then came Malcolm's voice, steady, deep, carried across the distance of years. I used to think people changed when they were punished. But sometimes, they change when they finally start to see. Justice isn't the end of wrongdoing. It's the beginning of understanding. Ethan sat there, his hands cupped together as if holding what warmth he could still find. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about money, or sentences, or loss. He was thinking about his father, the man who had lost everything to preserve one thing that never expires: integrity. And in the quiet of that small library, beneath the photograph of the man who built a bridge between guilt and redemption, Ethan Ridge began not to pay, but to learn. April morning. The sky over Tacoma was clearer than it had been in months, that rare shade of blue you only see after winter gives up. Sunlight spilled through the hospital window, laying a golden line across the worn leather notebook I kept by my side. I'd been discharged. The doctors advised rest. I didn't rest. Instead, I began what I knew would be the final project of my life. I called it the Ridge Foundation for Elder Justice. A portion of the restitution, $540,000, would fund legal aid for elderly victims of financial abuse, teach them to protect themselves, and make sure no one else lost everything to the people they loved. I didn't want my name to live only in a courtroom record. I wanted it to stand for protection, something I had learned the hard way. Frank handled the legal paperwork. Irene agreed to serve as honorary accounting advisor. And when the time came to sign the registration papers, I used the same silver pen Linda had given me on my birthday in 1985. Engraved with 3 simple words, "Write what matters." That afternoon, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter by hand. Each stroke was slow, deliberate blue ink sinking into the paper like an old vein remembering how to carry life. Ethan. You once told me that money defines a man's worth. I've spent my entire life proving the opposite. When you took my money, you thought you stole my power. But when you lost everything, you learned what I already knew: value doesn't live in a bank account. It lives in the people who still stand beside you when that account is empty. I don't need your apology. I only need you to remember this. One day, when you help someone and expect nothing in return, you'll hear it, that quiet ticking inside your chest. That's justice. Dad, Malcolm Ridge. I folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it on the nightstand beside my silver pocket watch. Its ticking was soft, steady, the rhythm of Linda's breath still echoing somewhere in time. Across the city, Ethan Ridge stepped out of the Tacoma Senior Haven Center. His gray volunteer uniform was faded. His shoes were caked with dirt from the garden he'd just helped clear. In his hand was that morning's local paper. The front page headline read, "Malcolm Ridge launches foundation to combat elder financial abuse." Below it, a photo of me sitting by the window light, falling across my face. The smile was small, untriumphant, the kind of peace that comes when you've simply done what you were meant to do. Ethan stared at the word justice for a long time. Then he folded the paper and began walking toward the hospital. The afternoon sky burned gold. When he reached my room, he paused outside the door, holding a small wooden box, the one he'd kept hidden for months. Inside was my pocket watch. Police had mistakenly returned it to him during evidence release, believing it to be personal property. He'd been carrying it ever since, unable to bring it back. Until today. The nurse nodded, letting him in. The room was quiet, just the soft pulse of the heart monitor and the thin light spilling through blinds. I was asleep, my face marked with fatigue, but breathing steady. Ethan stood there a long time. He wanted to speak, but no words came. Between us stretched years of silence and a chasm carved by broken trust. He stepped closer and set the box beside the bed. Next to it, he noticed the sealed envelope. He didn't open it. Didn't dare. From his pocket, he pulled a small scrap of paper, wrote a few trembling words, and placed it beside the envelope. "I understand now, Dad." He lingered there, watching me breathe. Sunlight crept across the table, lighting both pieces of paper, 2 generations, 2 lessons, 2 halves of a fractured life. Before leaving, Ethan glanced at the pocket watch. He opened it. The ticking filled the stillness of the room, steady, warm, and real. For a moment, it blended perfectly with the monitor's rhythm, 1 heartbeat of blood, 1 heartbeat of time. I woke not long after. The room was still bathed in pale light. On the table, the wooden box was open. The pocket watch lay between 2 notes, his and mine. The scrawled words caught my eye. "I understand now, Dad." My chest tightened. I didn't know if Ethan truly understood. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of anger. Because justice, I realized, was never meant to punish, it was meant to heal. I picked up the pocket watch. Its ticking was steady, warm, and for the first time it didn't sound like a verdict. It sounded like something that had finally been set right. There are things you never get back, trust youth time. But if you spend what's left protecting others, even your mistakes can turn into prayer. I smiled faintly, folded the letter once more, and placed the watch against my chest. Outside, Tacoma was drenched in sunset light, spilling gold across the old brick buildings, across the same streets I once walked with Linda, and now with a heart still beating slowly but true. Autumn came early to Tacoma. The air turned crisp, the sky soft and still. Outside the hospital, the oak trees were budding again, small green leaves breaking through the gray bark. There was no wind, no storm, no noise, only the faint sound of sparrows mixing with the warmth of morning light. In a quiet room on the third floor, Malcolm Ridge left the world the same way he had lived in it, quietly, neatly, without troubling anyone. He passed in his sleep, one hand resting over his chest. Beneath it lay his silver pocket watch, its hands still moving steady, calm. The night doctor later said softly, "He went peacefully. No pain." Irene arrived first, then Frank, and a few neighbors' people who had once waved at Malcolm from their porches, thinking he was just a quiet old man with a watering can. They didn't know he'd redefined what justice could mean. The funeral was held at a small cemetery south of Tacoma. No cameras, no reporters, only a single white chrysanthemum in every mourner's hand. Frank gave the eulogy. His voice trembled once, then steadied. Malcolm Ridge didn't just reclaim stolen money. He reclaimed dignity for every person who'd ever been dismissed or deceived. And he did it without hatred. When he finished, a soft breeze moved through the graves. The white petals trembled like a quiet applause. At a distance, Ethan stood beneath an oak tree coat, dark head bowed. He didn't come closer. Apologies meant nothing now, not beside the sound of a coffin being lowered into the ground. In his hands he held the worn envelope, his father's letter. He had read it dozens of times, and every time the same line cut deeper. When you lose everything, you'll learn what truly matters. He stayed long after the service ended. When Frank passed by, he placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder just once, then walked on. A week later, in Frank Delaney's law office, the will was read aloud. Frank's voice was measured, deliberate. All personal assets, including home vehicle and EverWest federal savings accounts, are to be transferred to the Ridge Foundation for elder justice. No private heirs. All funds are to be used solely for education and the protection of seniors from financial abuse. Ethan sat in the back. He said nothing. No one looked at him, but he could feel every sigh, every quiet glance. When it was over, he was the last to leave. On the desk, a coffee cup sat cold beside a file labeled Executor Frank Delaney. He stared at it for a long time. No anger. Just emptiness, the kind that comes only when understanding arrives too late. By May, Tacoma had warmed. The oak trees outside Tacoma Senior Haven were thick with leaves again. Ethan returned there, the same center where he had once mopped floors and washed dishes. But this time his badge read Program Coordinator, Ridge Foundation Chapter. He began organizing small workshops teaching seniors how to read bank emails, recognize scams, and verify documents. He didn't lecture. He spoke like a man at confession. That afternoon, in his first class, he stood before the whiteboard, hands trembling slightly. Dozens of gray-haired faces watching him with patient trust. He drew a slow breath and said quietly, "If you think your parents don't need money." He paused. "Remember, that's their blood. Every dollar in their savings came from skipped lunches, sleepless nights, and calloused hands. I know that, because I forgot it once." The room fell silent. A woman wiped her tears. An old man nodded slowly. At the back of the room, Irene watched. The judgment once sharp in her eyes had softened, replaced by something quieter. Recognition. When the class ended, Ethan gathered the papers. Above the community bulletin board hung a silver pocket watch, its glass polished to a soft glow. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "In memory of Malcolm Ridge, integrity never expires." Ethan looked up. The afternoon light struck the glass, scattering across the wall, bright, fleeting, and beautiful. He stood there a long while listening to the ticking in his mind. And then his father's voice, calm, resonant, forgiving, rose once more like a breeze through time. "I lost my money, but I found what mattered, justice. And sometimes justice doesn't knock with a gavel. It arrives in silence." A soft wind moved through the open door, fluttering the edge of the calendar on the wall. Ethan smiled, not the smile of a man forgiven, but of a man finally learning to forgive himself. He gathered his things and stepped outside. The path was lined with oak trees, the same path Malcolm used to walk after long days of work. The sun dipped low, painting the ground in gold and stretching Ethan's shadow far ahead of him. And as his footsteps echoed softly through the fading light, his father's voice, the final narration, carried through the air. Every road needs a bridge, and forgiveness is the only bridge that leads us back to ourselves. I built that bridge out of pain so my son could cross without falling. The screen fades to black. Only the ticking of a pocket watch remains tick, 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 mingling with the chirping of birds outside. Thank you for listening. If you've ever seen greed turn into a hard-earned lesson, share your story. Because justice begins with the courage of one person who chooses to speak.